Please turn to page 50. After introducing to your students the movie script and Come Alive boxes, you are now ready to begin the narrative writing lessons. On this page, what you will see are your standards. So grade 2, your Common Core standards are in the upper left hand of this page. Notice your standards are written out, but also below that are my narrative writing stages lessons 4 and 5. Those are the stages that you will work at, so when you complete and your students master stage 5, they will actually reach at standard writing for the Common Core. Third grade, your standards are on the upper right-hand corner, and then right below them are my narrative writing lessons, stages 4 through 6. And again, just like second grade, when your children master stage 6, they will then reach at standard writing for the Common Core in narrative writing. When you look below, you will see there are 3 graphic organizers for stages 4, 5, and 6. What I want to show you is, notice stage 4 has a vertical organizer, then you move to where you have a landscape position organizer once you hit grades 4. This is a critical decision for you to make. Where will you start your students? And this is for second or third grade. Will you start at stage 4 or could you start at the beginning of the year at stage 5? It's important for you to understand how to make this decision. Stage 4 will have a paragraph story, but the focus will be sequencing from one sentence to the next. The students will have a story opening, they'll have actions, they could have dialogue, they'll have descriptive language, sophisticated sentences, they'll have a story closing, but everything will be focusing on sequencing to the next action and the next action. When you hit stage 5, that's when there's a major jump in the organizational part of narrative writing. And that is, we switch to the landscape position because in stage 5, what you will notice here is there are these 3 boxes. And that's because the students now will be organizing their stories with a beginning, middle, end. And then within each one of those parts of the story, they will be sequencing many actions, dialogue, and thoughts. So now the story writing will become more sophisticated, but the organization requires that they can sequence. Once you start on stage 5, then you transition to beginning, middle, end, and sequencing actions in the beginning, sequencing actions in the middle, and in the end. And these actions can just be straight on actions, dialogue, or thoughts. So it's more complex in the ability to organize a story, but it's critical because now the stories are becoming longer. Once you hit stage 6, and this is primarily for third grade, but second grade, if you have higher level students, they can move on to stage 6. You not only will have a beginning, middle, and end, but now in the beginning, you're going to have a Come Alive box. You're going to actually have your students write a full-on descriptive so that your characters come alive and they develop the character traits and the mood of the setting. It's a way to make the writing more sophisticated and also to understand that you're not just writing more and more sentences for these stories, you are actually going in and showing them how to have more complex and more interesting stories, adding this descriptive idea of a Come Alive box. So let's go back quickly. Stage 4, we will have a paragraph story, but in this paragraph story, when they organize, they're just organizing from one action to the next. They're sequencing. Stage 5 is introducing, beginning, middle, end, where they now will be sequencing actions in a beginning, middle, and end. Once you hit stage 6, beginning, middle, end, but at the beginning of stage 6 in the beginning, it's no longer just some actions with dialogue and thoughts. It's actually a full-on description to start the story. Then you have your middle where you'll have actions, and then your end where you'll have your actions. All of these stages require that the students master the skills at each so that you can build and keep adding more skills to each one of the stages. It's critical for you to look at your students and know, if my students can't sequence, then I need to begin with stage 4. If they can sequence, then they're ready to move on to stage 5. And again, if they can sequence the actions, thoughts, dialogue within a beginning, middle, end, then they're ready for stage 6, where now the beginning is a come alive box. And then you have your actions, dialogue, thoughts with your middle and your ending. That's a quick overview of stages 4 through 6. Now let's go to page 51 and see the tools that you need to have for each one of these stages when you're teaching them. When you go to each stage, you will always introduce. We always want to introduce to students what they are doing. That is critical. So we will always have a chant. And this chant is a wonderful little way for the students to basically identify all of the elements that they will cover at that specific stage. In addition to the chant to introduce the stage to the students, you will have your teacher direction page. This is an at-a-glance page that you use so that you can, in a direct instruction manner, teach your students how to write narratives at each stage. In addition, there is a classroom wall chart for the students to use and follow along in their narrative writing lessons. These wall charts can be made where you could just make large ones for students to follow, or you could download a wall chart from our online table of contents and display it for students. If you download this chart, it will be an 8.5 by 14 colorful chart for your students to follow. Makes it much easier for you. All you have to do is print it up. Also, what you'll notice on this page is a sample organizer. And this organizer shows you, and in this case, this is a stage 4, what a finished piece of writing would look like at the organizational level. So when students are following the steps, this is what their organizer should look like. And in this case, like I said, at a stage 4. So every time you have a narrative writing lesson, you know, I will introduce with a chant. I will have my teacher at a glance page to follow the steps. And I have a lot of information on that page for you to remember all of the different items and skills you need to teach the students. You will have a chart displayed for the students to follow, and then there's also a sample organizer for you to see what that organizer should look like when it's completed. In addition to the charts, I also have narrative writing tools. The tools are used differently depending on whether you're writing a personal narrative or an imaginative narrative, and also depending on the stage that you're writing at. You can find these tools by going to your table of contents and clicking on the narrative writing tools. In that section, I'll go through each one of them in a very detailed manner and also show you how you can store them so that you can have easy access to each one when needed. At the 2nd and 3rd grade narrative writing level, I've given you a quick overview of the stages of writing, 4 through 6, the charts and tools that you'll use. But before we begin each one of those stages, I need to show you one more thing. On pages 52 and 53, you will notice that there are 2 types of narratives, personal narratives and imaginative narratives. And we will be writing both types. On the personal narrative page, I have a little chant that I introduce to students so they understand what a personal narrative is, as well as a chant for the imaginative narrative. And then I also have some charts for each one of those types of writing. Let's look first of all at the personal narrative. When I introduce a personal narrative to the students, I always say, boys and girls, we are going to write a personal narrative. And then I have the students say to me, what's a personal narrative? Thank you for asking. A personal narrative is, and then we make the letter T, a true story about myself that's memorable. A personal narrative is a true story about myself that's memorable. So when I think of what a personal narrative is, what is it? It's true. It's about myself. So I need to use what word when I write? I. And then it's memorable. What do I mean by memorable? Memorable is when something happened to me and It was so important for me to tell you this story because I had an emotional reaction. For example, something happened to me that made me really happy. So now I have to tell you the story about what happened to me that made me happy. That's the whole idea of a personal narrative. I'm not just telling you I woke up, I had breakfast, and I went to sleep. I'm telling you a story because something happened to me and caused me to have an emotional reaction. It could be something that made me happy, something that made me sad, something that made me mad or embarrassed or scared. These are the reasons why we tell personal narratives and why they're important to us. So below here, what you'll notice is a chart that I have. And on this chart, I have different emotions in columns. And then I have different pictures with stories that match that emotion. And here's the reason why. When we have kids write personal narratives and they're writing their own stories, we may say, boys and girls, you're now ready to write your own personal narrative. Write about a time that something made you happy. That's a great way to give children writer's block. You ever notice when you say something like that, suddenly you'll have all these students who will say, I've never been happy. I don't know what you're talking about. I can't come up with an idea. It's difficult when students are given a prompt and then they have to come up with an idea. So what I did was I put emotions on a chart, put them in columns, and then over here I have happy, but I also have other words that mean happy, so you have more sophisticated and higher level vocabulary. And then below it, I have pictures of different situations where I told the boys and girls, these are things that happened to me that made me happy. And these are stories that I'm going to tell you. So I have a list of different ideas of things that made me happy, like I got a special present, or I lost my tooth, or I was able to order any item I wanted on the menu when my family went out to dinner. These stories are listed so that I can give children an idea of what these different types of stories would be for each emotion. Then what I found was it was a great way for other students to store their stories because they do have great stories, but the problem is that when we give a prompt, they can't think of them. So if a child is coming in the morning and they want to tell you something important that happened to them, what I do is I tell them, you know what? Go grab a Post-it, draw a picture of what happened, and put your name on that Post-it. This was Ralph. Ralph, his dog had puppies. He drew a picture of a dog, he wrote his name, and he put it underneath the happy face column. Notice there's other Post-its here under the different emotions. This way, when the students have personal narrative stories, if they can't come up with an idea, they can use one of the ideas that's up on the board, or they can remember one that they had come up with and had previously posted up on this board. This is a wonderful way for students to get ideas for their stories. Let's go over here to page 53. This is imaginative narratives. Let's do the imaginative narrative chant. That's when a person, animal, or an imaginary character goes through unusual actions to get something done or to solve a problem. So let's say that chant one more time. An imaginative narrative is when a person, animal, or imaginary character goes through unusual actions to get something done or to solve their problem. Below is a chart, a story generator students can follow to come up with ideas for an imaginary narrative. And that is, they can choose a setting, but when they choose a setting, they always want to think of the mood. So in other words, if I'm going to write a story and I'm going to choose a setting where I want to have it in a house, well, how do you want that house to feel? Do you want it to be scary? Do you want it to be cozy and warm? They always need to not just at this point come up with when and where the story takes place, but they want to choose a setting so it matches the mood, the atmosphere of the type of story they're going to tell. Also, they need to choose a character, a person or an animal. And at this point, they need to think of what character trait is really important for me to reveal about this person. So I may have a setting where it's going to be in a house, but my character is going to be, let's say, a man, but he's a grumpy, mean man. So I don't want this house to be a cozy, warm house. I want it to be maybe a messy, dark, and gloomy house. And I don't want the setting to be a bright, beautiful day. Maybe it'll be a cloudy day. So that way, the character and their trait and the mood of the setting match each other. It's a wonderful way to help students understand that these things need to go together for their stories to make sense. The last thing is for them to choose either a problem or a need or want. And I have a list of different problems, needs, or wants on this chart, but I also have cards that students can choose, and those are conflict or problem cards that they could choose in order to come up with a problem in their story or a need or want. We have our personal narratives and our imaginative narratives. I have these wonderful little charts that you could use in order to help students as you introduce the personal or imaginative. So we are ready now to go to our different stages of writing to teach them how to write these different stories.